What do an ordinary thunderstorm, an atomic bomb, funny cat videos, Nikola Tesla and bow tie have in common? More than meets the eye. And to prove it, let's go to 1899 and look at a thunderstorm in Colorado Springs, which is located in the United States. We will not be alone to watch her. Nikola Tesla sits in a laboratory nearby and studies lightning. The scientist's equipment is quite successful in tracking them even hundreds of kilometers from the laboratory. Tesla is especially attracted by a funny fact. Lightning strikes farther from the laboratory periodically had a greater effect on the receiving device than those that struck the ground closer. At first glance, the solution is obvious. The difference is simply the strength of the lightning strikes. But after checking the data, Tesla realized that this was not the case. Through further experimentation, Nikola realized that it was the ground. Its coil received the waves that propagated after the lightning strike on the ground, as if along an ordinary wire. Then Tesla decided to create a device that would emulate the process, that is, to transfer energy and therefore information wherever the soul desires. And for another person, as if through the air. In reality, the guide was the natural environment and the good old land. Nikola had not only romantic, but also the most mundane goals. After all, a similar process of transferring energy in the classical way that we use now then had a weak efficiency. According to Tesla's idea, his method offered almost 100% efficiency, and in the process, only grains of energy were lost. Nikola built the apparatus and he even tested it by turning on 200 light bulbs 42 kilometers from his laboratory. Tesla called journalists to the event and the whole thing was documented. Immediately, the scientists began to think globally and thought about the unified energy and information ecosystem. With a sufficient number of instruments, the entire planet Earth turned into one large wire and, as it were, began to vibrate. Having a receiver, at any point it was possible to refuel your electric car or listen to the latest news on the radio. Epic, isn't it? But unfortunately the harsh reality intervened in the matter. On the one hand, Tesla overestimated the efficiency of his design and in reality it required many years of work. On the other hand, the electric tycoons of the time went berserk. Such an easy-to-obtain energy would have made them bankrupt. So they left Tesla without funding, and with the outbreak of World War II, they completely demolished the Tesla Tower, justifying this by the fact that German aircraft could use it as targets. In general, development was abandoned for many decades. But Tesla's idea of a global energy and information space lived on and inspired scientists. Because of the tycoons, no one got into the energy, but they tried to get into the information. Paul Watlett in 1934 published a book about how humanity should collect and systematize the world's knowledge. He also created a universal decimal classification, thanks to which it became easier to search for books and information. Vannevar Bush, another scientist, built analog computers to solve differential equations. Ironically, his mechanical designs were used by General Electric, the very tycoons who strangled Tesla's designs. Vannevar Bush later also went into military development, having managed to create the legendary Memex project, a semi-mechanical computer that helped a person in his work. Alan Turing and other geniuses who gave birth to computers in their modern form worked for the needs of the army in the war. But our story is focused on another invention. Truth and its roots grow in the Second World War. An unremarkable gentleman named Joseph Licklider, or simply Lick, was working in an unremarkable Harvard laboratory at that time. His specialty is not electronics, and not even mechanics. Lick was a psychoacoustician. And in the war he helped develop technology that improved the audibility of radio communications during air battles and bombings. But after the war, Joseph was carried away by the idea of interactivity and the most useful use of computers, which were laid by Tesla's followers. But the times were really tough. In the post-war period, scientists were not given money, as at the end of the 20th century. There was a lot and very little money during the Cold War at the same time. Little money if you were an ordinary researcher and worked for the good of humanity. And there was a lot of money if you were asking for funding for a development that would somehow help in superiority over the USSR. The first test of a Soviet-made atomic bomb spurred the infusion of money into science, who worked for military needs. Well, when the USSR dared to get into space before the United States, the government went mad and scientists saw such budgets as never before. The truth is, again, we are talking about developments for the benefit of the Army. When the ARPA organization created a good mock-up of a spaceship, but with murky prospects for use in war, the development was abandoned. Then, sad from the lack of promising ARPA projects, Joseph Licklider Parked, who by this time had already managed to submit to the Ministry of Defense a whole report that the symbiosis of a person and a computer is necessary. But he must be smart and divided among people. Indeed, while one person is typing a program on a computer, the computing power of the machine is idle. Or make it so that while one user is thinking, the second is performing a task on the computer. First time shared by one machine was John McCarthy, a mathematician at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1959. There, in the 60s, a small war broke out in the scientific community. While McCarthy, Licklider and other guys like Fernando Corbat campaigned and worked on the interactivity of computers, their rivals, like Wesley Clark, believed that this should not be done and one person should use one computer. Fortunately, the camp of networkers won. And Fernando Corbat, who adored stylish bow ties, ended up creating a machine where each user had his own corner of memory, protected by a password. The computer was controlled via terminals. If anyone did not understand the epic nature of the key event, this is actually an invention of the server, similar to YouTube, which stores our video, and we connect to it to watch the videos we need. The analogy is not entirely correct, but the technology can be considered a transitional stage. The same Joseph Licklider continued to work, sucking on the ARPA funded by the military. With his charisma, he convinced everyone that universal computerization and time sharing is the key to optimizing work and potentially the key to success in any war even before it even starts. The internet was still very far away. By the time ARPA created its first prototype, Joseph Licklider had already left the organization. But it was his efforts to popularize the availability of computers and work on them at the same time that formed the basis of the ARPANET project. True, it should be noted that similar work was carried out at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and at the University of California. Packet data transmission was generally developed by civilians, but it is traditionally believed that Licklider, who got to the right place at the right time, attracted the attention of big people and big money to the issue. And thanks to him, all these disparate developments came together in ARPANET. Its first launch took place in 1969. Well, in general, it is difficult to name a specific date for the appearance of the internet in the world. Indeed, years before ARPANET and Licklider, S&G integrated observation stations into one network, transferring data between them with the help of a company, AT&T. But it was a semi-analog story, so ARPANET is still considered the parent of the internet, invented, of course, for the emergency transmission of information throughout the United States in case of war. Institutions across the country were finally brought together and seated at a common table to work on moments that will define human history. Winton Cerf, Stephen Crocker, John Postel, Michelle Wingfield, and other pioneers of the internet have been solving major problems. They will develop a hierarchy of data transfer protocols, the transfer mechanism itself, remote access protocols, and even email. Despite the fact that the first test on October 29, 1969 will end in failure and from the word login typed on one computer, only the letters L and O will reach the second computer, ARPANET will succeed. The convenience of instant communication created by the military will also be appreciated by ordinary scientists. Already in 1973, the network will have branches in the UK and Norway, and in 1983 there will be 4,000 computers on the network with the cost of sending one email at 50 cents. Many people usually end their story here, saying that ARPANET will eventually open up to ordinary users and grow into the internet, but in reality this is not entirely true. Seeing the progress of the network, civilian users will also start creating their own networks. And when scientists from other universities get involved, INSNet will appear on the arena. Ironically, in the race to create the internet, it is not the military that will win, but the civilians from the US National Science Foundation. It was INSNet, not ARPANET, that would become the backbone of the internet in the 90s. After all, if the military had enough capacity and their efforts were focused on connecting new terminals, then civil scientists were only interested in science. The original goal of NSFNet was to create a network to increase the productivity of research and communication between institutions. Focusing on improving the concepts of ARPANET, already in 1984 the bandwidth of the new network was 56 kilobits per second, and almost anyone could join it, which in the first year of operation connected 10,000 computers to the NSFNet. In many respects from other smaller networks, ARPANET was hopelessly losing the competition because the beginnings of internet commerce and entertainment began to appear in NSFNet. In 1989, the brainchild of the U.S. Department of Defense became part of the NSFNet, which, in turn, the U.S. government transferred to public commercial use in 1995, which is considered the date of the appearance of the internet throughout the world. You yourself can observe what this led to on a daily basis. Well, finally, we note that NSFNet has not gone anywhere. He still lives, unites scientists and develops a new internet standard. It has an uncomplicated name, Internet 2. And the task of the project, digital communication at very high speeds. Basically, universities are connected to Internet 2. For example, students from public universities can taste it. So it is possible that in our lifetime we will survive another internet revolution. This is where our story ends. Until next time, friends.